kunjavi hari. Gopichanna Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopichanna Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janarandana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janarandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopichanna Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janarandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jananandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajaka Ashtamur Shri Srimad His Divine Graces Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Anant Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki ISKCON Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shaimakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Shri Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Maharha Vastrabharana Kanchakosnisha Bhushita Gopa Samayayu Rajan Nanopayana Panaya Maharabhastra Bharana Kanchukoshni Shabhushata Gopasamaya Rajan Nanupayan Panaya. Please chant. Kanchukoshni Shabhushita Gopasamaya Rajan Namapayan Maharavastaparanam Kanchukoshni Shabhush Gopasamaya Rajan Namapayan Panaya. Maharabhastabharana Kanchukoshni Shabhushita Gopasamaya Yurajan Payanaha. Ladies. Maharabhastabharana Kanchukoshni Shabhushita Gopasamaya Yurajan Namapayan Maharabhastabharana Kanchukoshni Shabhushita Gopasamaya Yurajan Nanapayanapanaya Kanchakoshi Shabushita Samurajan One more. Maharabhastra Bharana Kanchakoshni Shabushita Gopasamaya Yurajan Maharaha, extremely valuable. Vastra Abharana, with garments and ornaments. Kanchuka, by a particular type of garment. Used in Vrindavan. Ushnisha, with turbans. Bhushita, being nicely dressed. Gopa, all the cowherd men. Samayayu, came there. Rajan, O King Maharaj Prikit. Nana, various. Upayayana, presentations. Panaya, holding in their hands. Translation and purport. O King Parikit, the cowherd men dressed very opulently with valuable ornaments and garments such as coats and turbans. Decorated in this way and carrying various presentations in their hands, they approached the house of Nanda Maharaj. When we consider the past condition of the agriculturalist in the village, we can see how opulent he was simply because of agricultural produce and protection of cows. At the present, however, agriculture having been neglected and cow protection given up, the agriculturalist is suffering pitiably and is dressed in a niggardly torn cloth. This is the distinction between the India of history and India of the present day. By the atrocious activities of Ugra Karma, how we are killing the opportunity of human civilization. Om Agyana Timarandasya Gyananjana Shlakaya Chakshu Chunmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttaparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vidam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savarutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapte Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Manchagopatarubhyascha kripasindubhyevacham patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Mahavastra Bharana Kanchakoshni Shabhushita Gopasamya Yurajan Anupayanam Panaya. This is about the agriculturalists in the village. I grew up in a farming community. My parents were not farmers, but all around the town were farms. My father, unfortunately, was the dealer of tractors and heavy farming equipment. So that means that the bulls were no longer being worked, just the tractors in the fields. My friends would come to school in the buses from their farms, and after school, I was told they would go home and they would milk the cows and help their parents with the farm chores. Prabhupada mentions here that by the atrocious activities of Ugra Karma, we're killing the opportunity of human civilization. This was discussed yesterday by Jayadvaita Swami. He spoke about the negative aspects of modern life. And how India is suffering by giving up the Vedic way of life. This creates a terrible society full of misery, dukkhi, miserable civilization. And, it's hard to imagine now that the cows would be decorated with gold. Yeah. Prabhupada distinguishes between the India of history and India of the present day. He had personal experience. He was interested in Gandhi's independence movement. Gandhi was promoting a return to village life and the simple trades like weaving cloth. But his counterpart, the highly placed first president of independent India, didn't advocate simple living and high thinking. He advocated industrializing India. And he opened many factories in India, and it changed the course of independent India. It became an Ugra Karma civilization. Prabhupada lamented that because he was sympathetic to Gandhi's ideas. I'm not going to talk further today about the negative aspects of Ugra Karma, but I'm going to speak from another point of view, and my aim is to increase your appreciation and understanding of how the Bhagavatam has been appreciated in India. Let me start with some bio data. I'll explain why I'm doing this. I'm an American, and I met devotees while attending and after attending the University of Minnesota. And my impetus for coming to ISKCON was meeting Jayadvaita, he was Brahmachari then, and Satsvarup Goswami, who were involved in literary activities. This was in late 1973. They were editors of Back to Godhead magazine and Prabhupada's books. And I was attracted to that. I was just out of college, and I had not wanted to go to graduate school. I had been accepted to study Buddhism, of all things. Buddhism. But shortly after meeting them, I joined ISKCON in California. And very soon after that, I met Srila Prabhupada in Los Angeles. And 6 months later, I was his disciple. Prabhupada, of course, explained that Buddhism, is negation. The word Nirvana means extinguishing. Like when you blow out the flame of a candle, the flame is gone. So in the same way, the Buddhists aspire to extinguish material life. But they don't have much to say about what happens after you do that. But Krishna Consciousness says everything. And so I was quite pleased to take up Krishna Consciousness. And I looked forward to getting involved in the literary activities in ISKCON, which kind of would fulfill my desires to be in graduate school. I just didn't have the faith or the shraddha to go to graduate school. I was tired of university life after 4 years. And so in ISKCON I got new impetus, I got the whole Vedic literature was there to occupy my time and mind, and I got involved in literary service. One of the first services I did was doing the research for the first book written by Satsvarup Das Goswami. This was called Readings in Vedic Literature. It's a book for college students. And it just describes in 8 chapters the aspects of Vedic knowledge and Vedic civilization. But what he did in this book is incorporate a lot of statements by scholars and academics, both positive and negative. The scholars assessed the Vedic literature, sometimes in a positive way, sometimes negatively. So he used their statements in the book. He would meet their negative comments with his counter-arguments and so on. And this book was presented to Prabhupada in 1976 when he was in America. So having had a little experience dealing with scholarly comments on Vedic literature, today I want to present some recent positive assessments of the Bhagavatam. And this should actually prepare you if you ever meet a professor or meet a college student who you can talk to him on these terms, what scholars say. In 2004, 15 years ago, a scholarly devotee in New York published his translation of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam for Penguin Books. Many of you are familiar with Penguin Books, big publisher. So it shows how the devotees are advancing in that scholarly field. The Penguin asked, they were looking for a scholar to translate the 10th canto, and a devotee got the job. Pretty good. So in his introduction, which was written for someone in the Western world who doesn't know what the Bhagavatam is, he brought out a lot of good points, and I'll mention these during the first half of my class today. And then I'm going to talk about other assessments by another scholar from Yale University, His name is Norman Hein. He did research in Vrindavan as a graduate student. He went and he studied the Krishna Leela dramas that are put on in Vrindavan. And he came out with a book called The Miracle Plays of Mathura. I read that book. Anyway, Edward Bryant, he's the scholar who did the translation of the 10th canto. So we'll deal with him first. He informs us that Krishna is perhaps best known in the West as the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita. After the Mahabharata war, Krishna inaugurated the present Kali Yuga by his departure from this world. That's when Kali Yuga began. In the Mahabharata, Krishna plays a pivotal role as a statesman and a friend of the Pandavas. He's the Secretary of State. He goes on behalf of the Pandavas. He goes to the Kurus. He tries to make peace, but it doesn't work. But the Mahabharata doesn't give much more information about other aspects of Krishna's life. And in fact, in India, Krishna's statesmanship in the Mahabharata and his teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, even his teachings in the Bhagavad Gita, are not the best loved stories about him in India. Rather, it's his leelas, his pastimes in Vrindavan, as an infant and a child and a boy, that have been relished by the Indians over the centuries. At least for the last 1,000 years, the 10th canto of the Bhagavad Purana has been the principal text dedicated to the narrative of Krishna's appearance and his activities. So to back up what he's saying, Edwin Bryant then tells us that 81 commentaries have been written on the Bhagavatam. How many did you think there were, Vedurat? Oh, you thought there might be even more? Maybe some devotees think there are less, because we hear about Prabhupada translating from a book which contained commentaries, and in one book you can't get that many commentaries, so we might think maybe there's 15 or some. But there's 81 commentaries on the Bhagavatam. I don't know if they're all Vaishnava commentaries. Some could have been made by some of the big Mayavadis. Sometimes they touch on the Bhagavatam. And of course the Bhagavatam, translations of the Bhagavatam have been done in all the languages of India. There's at least 23 languages in India, so 23 translations at least. And in Bengal, we're in West Bengal. How many translations in West Bengal do you think have been done? Yes, sir. Make a guess. 20, that's very good, but it's not enough. There actually have been 40. So see how popular it is in West Bengal. This is where, Gaudiya Vaishnavism flourished. So many Bengali translators, they were thinking, well, I'm going to do a translation. 40 different translators. And probably after the time of Lord Chaitanya, he doesn't say when these 40 translations were done or the 81 commentaries were all written. He doesn't place it in a time frame. But we can imagine that after the time of Lord Chaitanya, perhaps a lot of them appeared. Certainly Lord Chaitanya and his followers changed the way Hinduism had been configured. Hinduism is described not only in India, but even by Western scholars, as being about Brahma, four-headed Brahma, and Vishnu, the creator and maintainer, and Lord Shiva. People think of Hinduism as having three gods, and so on. But the Krishna theologies that emerged in the 16th century under the influence of Lord Chaitanya and his followers suggest that it's not Krishna who's an incarnation of Vishnu, but Lord Vishnu who's an incarnation of Krishna, a partial incarnation of Krishna. So that gives more prominence to Krishna. The Gaudiya Vaishnavas extol Krishna as the supreme absolute truth from whom all other deities come. And the authority in this regard is the Bhagavad Purana. So Lord Chaitanya, he taught, this is one of the main truths, that the Bhagavad Purana is the guidebook to the supreme absolute truth, the scriptural authority. Just to mention one other scholar, his name is Jack Hawley. He's from New York. I happened to meet him in 2017. I was in Oxford attending a workshop at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, which is a devotee project. And he's written a lot about Vedic texts. And Edwin Bryant mentions that Jack Hawley was looking at the sculptures, statues of Krishna that have survived from the period before 1500. That's about the time of Lord Chaitanya's appearance. So the time before that, he was looking at the statues of Krishna that survived from the time before 1500. And he noted that 800 of these statues or panels depicted Krishna, but only 3 of them referred to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. All the rest focused on Krishna's Vraja pastimes, his Vrindavan pastimes. So this indicates that the sculptures were indifferent to Krishna's adult life, and instead they focused on the events of his youth. This indicates what people's commitments were to the Vaishnava religion. They were really committed to Krishna as a child, as a youth, but not as an adult. And another scholar is mentioned named Rao, Indian scholar. He listed the 9 main forms of deities. 7 of the 9 main forms relate to Krishna's childhood pastimes. One is of Rukmini Dwarkadish, and another one is of Parthasarthi, Arjun's chariot driver. So 7 out of 9 have to do with, we could say, the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam was the first Purana to be translated into English. But it was the first Purana to be translated into a European language, and it was French. And this was in the time period 1840 to the 1900, the second half of the 1800s. he gives the name Eugene Burnouf's Bhagavat Purana translation. And of course that included the chapters of the Rasa Lila. We all know that there's a warning not to read the Rasa Lila until you've understood the first 9 cantos. But anyway, these European scholars, these French translators, they read it. They were coming out with this translation of the 10th canto. So the French got this first. Of course, French is famous as a country known for women, beautiful French women. Srila Prabhupada said about the deities, Radha, Paris, Ishvara, he said, Krishna came to Paris to find the most beautiful woman. He found Radharani. But Prabhupada also, I happened to be present in a garden in America when Prabhupada had come from Europe, and he mentioned that in Paris he had been shown a book about the Bhagavat Purana in French. And on the cover was, take a deep breath, was a picture of Srimati Radharani with no clothes. Prabhupada told us in the garden. Prabhupada said, this is so disgusting. They take their idea of the eroticism, and they project it onto Krishna's Leela. They think, oh, Krishna must be like us. So there's more to say about this. I'm going to come back to this point, but I'm going to now talk about the Bhagavatam being translated into English. This was done by a British scholar named Wilson. And you know what? There's only one English translation of the Bhagavatam. That's it. There's no line of translations. Oftentimes a classic, like let's say the Iliad and the Odyssey, or Dante's Divine Comedy. These books get translated again and again and again. They've been translated 50 times, but still a more recent scholar will come along and based on previous translations, the line of previous translations, he'll come up with a new translation. But there's no succession of English translations of the Bhagavatam. No Western scholar other than Wilson did this. But in India, some Indian scholars translated the Bhagavatam into English. And then, of course, we have the BBT edition of Prabhupada. That was finished. The 10th, 11th, and 12th cantos were finished by devotees from America. So, raises a question, why is there only one, was there only one English translation? What do you think? Edwin Bryant, this devotee scholar who did the translation of the Bhagavatam recently for Penguin Books, he says that there was only one translation mainly because of the Victorian sensibilities of certain 19th century Western and Westernized Indian scholars and critics. They were offended by the amorous liaisons of Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam. They thought, this book is about God, it's theology, and it tells about Krishna's amorous liaisons. It's not a very nice book, they thought. They were offended by this. They were Victorians. So during the Victorian time, a little bit like India, the topic of romantic liaisons was, kind of kept covered. It wasn't open as it is nowadays. So these scholars passed over the Krishna of this text in the 10th canto. And they were more in favor of the Krishna of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is a very righteous God. He teaches about Dharma. So this Bhagavad Gita was translated hundreds of times into non-Indian languages. So this is one of the reasons. Now, we're going to talk about what Norman Hine, the scholar from Yale, says about these things. He also mentions that Western writers were stunned and repelled by the erotic factor in the Bhagavatam's contents. But that was not all. He gives other reasons why the Bhagavatam wasn't translated. Other scholars or translators were silenced by the difficulty of the Bhagavatam's language. It made it difficult for them, it made it risky for them to make confident judgments about their translation. The language was difficult. So there weren't so many literary discussions among the scholars about the Bhagavatam. And they didn't have any English translations to go by. There was only one English translation. Other Puranas which had cruder language, less difficult language, and less difficult thoughts, they commented on more frankly and more fully. But often, is there a little water? Often also, they were not complimentary in their comments on the other Puranas. Oh, here it is. Good. As you may have heard, Western scholars sometimes deride the Puranas and say that they're full of fanciful, exaggerated stories and so on. So the scholars were talking like that, rather frankly and not often complimentary. But the Bhagavad Purana was considered by them to be really a difficult text to judge. They offered a few positive words about the Bhagavad Purana, but quietly passed on to discuss other English writings that were easier to deal with. Meanwhile, in India, over the past thousands of years, the Bhagavad Purana was famous all over India. There were manuscript copies of Bhagavad Purana in old libraries. Even nowadays, they find old manuscripts in libraries in every region of India. In other words, in today's language, it was a bestseller. Bhagavad Purana was a bestseller for hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years, last 1,000 years. And in these manuscripts, there's no interpolation compared with other Purana manuscripts. All the surviving texts are unanimous. They all say the same thing. They're all correct. Nothing's been changed. Sometimes, there's interpolations. It's an oral tradition, so sometimes the writers are talking to a particular audience. They might insert some comments that are relevant to the audience, and then those might get put in a manuscript, and then this way the manuscripts get distorted. But Norman Hine says that the authentic Bhagavatam was defended from corruptions by its ardent and well-versed devotee audiences. They didn't let corruptions into the text. They knew the Bhagavatam, and they didn't allow for someone to put in his own comments, his own version of the events, and so on. So, all the Bhagavatam manuscripts that are found are correct, the correct Srimad Bhagavatam text. Now, Norman Hein, I'm reading from a preface that he wrote to a devotee's translation or book about the Rasa Leela. My godbrother Garuda Das, Graham Schweik, he did his PhD on Krishna's Rasa Leela at the encouragement of his senior advisors at Harvard University. They said, this has to be explained, to the Westerners. So Norman Hein wrote the preface, and he makes the point that Sanskrit studies are no longer in their infancy. Sanskrit studies in the Western world have grown up. Students of Sanskrit now know the language, and they pay the price for competence in the language. To learn Sanskrit and become really competent in it, you have to pay the price. You can't. Garuda said that when he was learning Sanskrit, he would learn the baby, his son would cry at night, and he had to pick up the baby and walk with the baby until the baby went back to sleep. So he had his cards with the Sanskrit alphabet. And while he was holding the baby, he was looking at the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet, learning the alphabet. So sometimes in some universities, this Sanskrit is still taught, And to become a skilled worker in this field requires a lot of training. There's a science to of metrics, the metric science of the Puranas, the verses. They're chanted according to certain meters. Now that's understood. The language of Vyasadeva is a cultivated diction, cultivated language, sophisticated, cultivated Sanskrit. Often there's figures of speech used that were used in the courts, the royal courts. The poets of the Indian kings, they were expert. They could use a courtly version of Sanskrit. And Vyasadeva used this kind of high literary Sanskrit to achieve sound effects. You can get nice sound effects. You all know Rupa Goswami and they're famous for their patterns of sound in their verses that they wrote glorifying Krishna. So Vyasadeva is recognized as a genius. And the modern scholars are willing to recognize now that in this Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a poem that is entitled to the esteem of the whole world. It's a world-class poem. He quotes one scholar from Harvard who was Garuda's advisor, Daniel Ingalls. Daniel Ingalls says, for all its traditional piety and its traditional lore, lore means all the stories, all the old stories in the Bhagavatam. And despite its frequent archaisms, the Bhagavatam remains, especially in its 10th book, the most enchanting poem ever written. The 10th canto, the most enchanting poem ever written. This is a high rating, and it comes from an authority with long experience as teacher of the Bhagavad Purana. Now, the erotic aspects of the stories are no longer resisted, but they're deliberately evoked and they're dwelt on in the mind of the translator. Devotees learn about the world Goloka, the highest heaven of Krishna, the cow world. He calls it the cow world, where the blessed gopis are assembled. And Krishna, in his eternal sporting place, his sporting place is Vrindavan, he calls devotees to relish the pure and blameless pastimes that are performed. One of the reasons that the Victorians were wary of the eroticism in the Bhagavatam is that it was inspiring some people in India, sahajas, outsiders, people who are outside the Krishnite life, to misuse their followers. The sahajas would misuse their followers, engage them in prohibited promiscuity, prohibited sexual affairs. Prabhupada, of course, criticized this many times. But the Orthodox Hindu society, Nirvana tells us, was one of the most restrictive in the world in sexual matters. Some groups were rebellious toward these severe moral codes. In secluded places, they were said to hold meetings in some ways comparable to the gathering for the rasa dance, and they would lawlessly, without restriction, engage in their own idea of the rasa dance. So some people had suspicion about those who followed the Bhagavatam. Were the followers of the Bhagavatam like this? Bhaktivinoda Thakur discusses this at his time. People had the opinion that the Vaishnavas were perhaps like that. But no, they were not social rebels like that. No report is known, either given by a friend or an enemy, that the Bhagavat followers performed the rasa as a carnal act. The Bhagavatam's prohibitions appeared to have been observed. The Bhagavatam's prohibitions were observed among the Vaishnavas. And there's also moral codes, moral concerns given in the Bhagavad Gita, which were observed. You had the relationships between the castes, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and so on. These were not hostile relationships. They were cordial relationships. People got along. And they were supporters of the orthodox morality. Whenever there was some literature written that was prurient means emphasizing the erotic, like some schools of Hindi poetry, some schools, talked about love in their poems, but they didn't find patrons. Even in the secular royal courts of northern India, what to speak of finding patrons among the devotees. The devotees retained a purity of character. And probably that was because of their worship of Krishna, not in spite of the Krishna worship. The argument was that because you're worshiping Krishna, you'll become impure. You'll act impurely. But rather, Norman Hines says, it was because of their Krishna worship that they maintained their purity. So a good case is made for the devotees who follow the Bhagavatam. And then he calls attention to the last verse of the 5 chapters of the Rasa Leela, which give an assurance that the person who hears this Rasa Leela will attain high devotion to the Lord. And being sobered, dhira, he becomes dhira, he's sobered, he'll throw off lust, the disease of the heart. That's the benediction given to someone who hears the Rasa Leela. He'll attain high devotion and throw off mundane lust. And Norman Hines says, in no other work have I seen this conclusion. It's not a thoughtless formula, but a personal utterance for a special occasion. It's a personal utterance for a special occasion. Its simplicity attests to its authenticity. Vyasadeva is being authentic. He's saying you'll throw off lust. So the intention of the author, the intention that sustained the author as he wrote the Rasa Leela, comes before us. Actually, his intention in writing the whole Bhagavatam comes before us by his saying this. This is the culmination of the poem, the 10th canto. And he says, by hearing this Bhagavatam, you'll throw off lust. So there's some mystery. It may not be clear to everybody, he says. But no culture on earth is not compelled by human nature to face, to some degree, the tensions that the Bhagavatam addresses. In other words, this is a very human problem to have material lust, and for religionists, it's also a problem that has to be dealt with. All human cultures recognize this. So the Bhagavatam faces this tension. And therefore, Norman Hines says, for everybody, for all, there's something here to learn. At the very least, we have in this beautiful poem the literary wellspring of a major faith. The verses are eloquent. They can be pondered, especially by someone who is a devotee and who knows Sanskrit. These verses can be pondered. And one can consider the original meanings of the author. If we discern the original meanings of Vyasadeva, we're not going to be misled by the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam embodies the spirit of Indian civilization. Srila Prabhupada said this, He said that the invaders all came to India and they walked away, they sailed away with all the wealth that was in India. They're counting up now, the historians are counting up, reckoning how much wealth the foreigners took out of India. Some say it's like $45 billion worth of wealth that was taken out of India. So the claim that India was once wealthy is valid, but Prabhupada said India's real wealth was in the Sanskrit language. And he said, you didn't take that, so I've come to give you that. He said that in London. You didn't take this wealth, so I have come to give you the wealth of the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada was so sharp. He criticized the British, you've taken all our wealth, but you didn't take this, so I've come to give it to you. Any questions, or does anybody have any comments? Taruna.
Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Only translation he could find is with comments of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So it's kind of confusing. You said that Vaishnavas protected authenticity of Bhagavatam, but he himself couldn't find any.
Yeah, well, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was looking for a Bhagavatam at a time, particularly difficult time, when the Sahaja sects were prominent. And the reputation of the devotees had fallen down. Everybody was thinking, oh, the devotees are all sahajas. So just at that time, maybe there weren't many Bhagavatams on the market. So he had to look around. I would say that explains it. Other questions? Yes, sir.
It is mentioned Srimad Bhagavatam, the Amala Purana, and also is Nirmat Saranam Saranam. It's only for those who are non-envious.
Sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Srimad Bhagavatam is mentioned that it is Amala Purana and it is for those who are non-envious.
Sorry.
It is
Amala Purana.
Amala Purana, and
Okay.
it is meant for those who are non-envious.
Yes, it's for the non-envious.
Yeah, so you mentioned that this Purana was in the hands of so many others who are translated and then misinterpreted. Now, what are the implications of those who still read Srimad Bhagavatam? Do they get the benefit, or they're taken as an offensive way towards the Amala Purana?
What happens to those who see the Bhagavatam as an object of derision?
Correct. Do they get any benefit still, or are they considered as offensive? They are people with offensive mentality.
They commit offenses, and they may cause others to commit offenses. Yeah. And so what about that?
The question is, do they still get the benefit of reading Srimad Bhagavatam? Or
not so clearly. It's not so clear in their mind. It's distorted. It's like dust on the mirror. If you look in the mirror, you don't get a clear reflection if the mirror is very dusty. Braj Lakshmi, you had a question? Microphone here.
Hare Krishna, thank you for all these endeavors. To give us that is very precious.
Thank you.
And in the verse, it is said it's an explanation of why the agricultors suffer.
A representation.
I stay on that.
Okay, you're talking about traditional agriculture?
Yes, from this sweet and the beginning of our cycle in Europa, everybody change. How to explain that?
The change of agriculture from traditional to modern.
Yes.
Well, I mean, you could say the industrial age had something to do with it. The industrial age, the machine age, they discovered the power of the steam engine, and then they could build machines. The machines had, it's Kali Yuga is the age of iron, so they used iron to build machines, and that replaced the animals as the workers in the fields. That's one reason. But then the system of, you could say the Varnashram system, to the extent that it was followed in Europe, that broke down. The Brahmins, which would have, in Europe, that would have been the priestly class, they became corrupt. And therefore, the kings underneath them became corrupt. Previously, the monarchs and the pious priestly class were okay. They did something together. But then that broke down. There was rivalry. Eventually, they were thrown out. The kings and priests were thrown out. So traditional society broke down. There's lots of studies of that. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Radhika Raman Prabhu's seminar that he gave